The chamber was cold. It was always cold. The Galactic Concordat had built its grand chamber above a dying star, far from any single species' home, so that no one race could ever claim the light as their own. 12 alien species sat in a wide circle, their seats raised above the central floor, like judges looking down at something small and guilty. The air smelled like recycled nitrogen and old decisions. Ambassador Nari walked in alone. She was not tall. She was not loud. She wore a plain dark uniform with a single silver pin on the collar, the mark of Earth's diplomatic corps. No guards, no aides. She had left them all outside in the corridor, which had confused the Concordat's security staff greatly. Humans, they had learned over 40 years, almost never walked into important rooms alone. Nari did. She took her seat at the human delegation's podium and folded her hands on the table. Around her, the 12 representatives shifted in their seats. Some of them had bodies that didn't move the way human bodies moved. Some of them had eyes in places that made it hard to know where they were looking. But Nari had spent 11 years in this chamber. She knew exactly where all of them were looking. At her. The session had been announced as a trade review. The official notice, sent to Earth 3 weeks ago, had listed 3 minor complaints: a shipping lane disagreement, a disputed mining contract, and something about grain tariffs on a colony called Outer Veth. It was the kind of paperwork that usually sent junior diplomats, not ambassadors. Nari had read the notice twice, packed a single bag, and booked her own transport. Vorith opened the session. He was the Concordat's lead speaker that cycle, an insectoid creature from a species called the Kal, ancient and slow-moving in the way that only things with very long lives could afford to be. His outer shell was the color of dark amber. For 6 minutes, Vorith laid out a formal presentation. He began with the Thresh Belt. For 6 minutes, Vorith laid out a formal record of humanity's expansion into the Thresh Belt, a wide band of unclaimed systems near the outer edge of Concordat-recognized space. The Concordat had flagged the region as a protected migration corridor for 2 member species. Humanity had filed its own survey claims 7 years ago, built 3 stations, and moved approximately 40,000 people there. When the Concordat had sent a formal objection, Earth's government had replied with a counter-survey, a legal filing, and a very polite letter that ultimately said nothing at all. Then, Vorith moved to the weapons. He described them carefully. Rail mass accelerators, devices capable of launching dense projectiles at a fraction of light speed. And Earth had tested them publicly 4 years ago. The Concordat's Weapons Review Board had classified them as a Category 3 escalation risk and asked humanity to cap production at 12 units. Earth had agreed in writing. It had built 14 more. Nari listened without moving. Then came the population directive. The Concordat had issued 4 population advisories to Earth in the last 2 decades. Soft suggestions that humanity slow its birth rate and colony expansion to match the average growth curve of member species. 4 times Earth had received the advisories. 4 times Earth's population had grown faster than the year before. When Vorith finished, the chamber was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then he called the vote. The question was simple. It was read aloud by the chamber's neutral AI in a voice that had no feeling in it at all. Should the Galactic Concordat issue to the human species a formal ultimatum of dissolution, requiring Earth to surrender military oversight to a joint Concordat command within 90 days, or face a collective armed response from all member species? 12 votes, 1 by 1, in order of seniority. All 12 said yes. There was no drama in it, no speeches, no pausing for effect. The votes came in like a door being closed, one latch at a time, until the room was sealed. Nari was asked for humanity's formal response. She had not spoken once during the entire session. She looked up from the table now, and for a moment, she let her eyes move slowly around the circle. 12 species, 12 sets of eyes or sensors or whatever they used to see, all pointed at her. She thought about the 40 years humanity had spent in this coalition, the trade agreements, and the cultural exchanges, the very long meetings about very small things. She thought about the word dissolution and what it actually meant when you stripped away the diplomatic language. It meant that Earth would hand over its weapons and its ships and its right to say no, and in return, it would receive the Concordate's assurance that everything would be fine. She picked up her tablet and powered it off. She stood up. "I'll let our commander know," she said. Then she walked out. No one stopped her. No one said anything. The chamber's AI logged her departure as an unresolved response and flagged the session for follow-up. Vorith watched the door close behind her and said nothing for a long time. 16 hours later, on Earth, in a building that did not appear on any public map, a woman named Jiyeon read the encrypted message on a small screen. She read it once. She set the screen down on her desk and looked at the wall for a moment. Her office had no windows. She had never seen the need for them. Daewon was standing behind her. He had been her tactical officer for 9 years, and he had learned, over those 9 years, to read the way she breathed. Right now, she was breathing slowly and steadily, the way she did when something had finally arrived that she had been expecting for a very long time. 90 days, she said. They gave us 90 days. Daewon looked at the back of her head. You've been waiting for this. She picked up the screen and read the message again. They think 90 days is pressure, she said. They think if they give us just enough time to be afraid, we'll fold. She set the screen down again. They've never understood what we do with time. Daewon didn't answer that. There wasn't anything to say to it. Jiyeon stood up and walked to the door. Get Junho on the line, she said, and tell Nari she did well. The news hit Earth's public feeds at 0600 Standard Time, and by 0800 it had already broken everything else on the broadcast grid. The anchors used words like crisis and ultimatum, and the most dangerous moment in human history. Some of them said it with wide eyes and shaking voices. Some of them said it with the careful, rehearsed calm that people use when they are very afraid and are being paid not to show it. And the Concordate had also released its own war projection report to the public, something it had never done before. The numbers in the report said that in the event of armed conflict, human fleets would be overwhelmed within 6 weeks. Colonies beyond the mid-belt would be cut off within 3. Earth itself would be unreachable within 10. The projection was detailed. It had charts. It had graphs. It had a section at the end about the expected cooperation of civilian populations under Concordate administrative transition, which was a very long phrase that meant something very short and very bad. People on Earth read those numbers and they were afraid. People in the outer colonies read those numbers and they started packing. Evacuation ships began filling up at the border stations. Families with money left first. Families without money waited and argued about whether to wait or go. Colony governors sent frantic messages to Earth asking for guidance. Earth's public government sent back statements about ongoing diplomatic engagement and measured response frameworks, which told everyone exactly nothing. Jiyeon let all of it happen. She did not give a speech. She did not appear on any broadcast. She did not send reassurances to the colony governors. She read their messages, filed them, and went back to work. On the 7th day after the vote, she took Daewon down a lift shaft beneath the surface of Mars, into a facility that existed in no Concordat reviewed manifest, no public record, and no file that had ever left Earth's most restricted servers. The lift ride took 4 minutes. Neither of them spoke during it. The doors opened into a corridor that was very long and very bright and smelled like machine oil and something electrical. Engineers walked past carrying tablets and cables. Nobody looked up. They had been working here, and most of them, for years. Some of them had been working here since before Daewon had taken his current post. Ji-yeon walked slowly. She talked as she walked. She started with the accelerators. The 14 rail mass accelerators that Earth had built beyond the Concordat's agreed cap. Those weren't the real ones. Those were the ones she had meant the Concordat to find. They were functional, yes. They were dangerous, yes. But they were also placed in positions that any reasonable Concordat analyst would flag, catalog, and plan around. They were the weapons humanity had shown the Council, so the Council would stop looking for the ones it hadn't shown. The real accelerators were buried in the Thresh Belt. Daewon stopped walking. The Thresh Belt, the 40,000 colonists, the 3 stations, the 7 years of legal filings and counter-surveys. All of it had been real. All of it had also been a frame around something else. The colonists were real people living real lives, but the stations they had built sat on top of automated drone platforms that had been laid into the belt's asteroid fields, one piece at a time over the course of a decade. The drones were not obvious. They were built into the rock. They looked, to any scanner passing through, like debris. Each one carried a launcher, and the range on those launchers was 3 times anything the Concordat had ever recorded from a human weapon. Daewon stood in the corridor and did not say anything for a moment. "Keep walking," Ji-yeon said. They walked. She showed him the interdiction field next, a working FTL interdiction system, a technology that, in theory, could lock any ship inside a defined region of space and prevent it from making a jump. And the Concordat's 3 most advanced member species had been attempting to develop interdiction tech for 60 years and had produced nothing functional. Earth had been sitting on a working version for 3 years. It had never been tested in combat. It had never been disclosed. It had also never been registered with the Concordat's Technology Review Board, which was a significant treaty violation, which was also entirely the point. Then she brought him to a room near the back of the facility where a man named Junho was sitting at a workstation surrounded by empty cups and handwritten notes stuck to every available surface. Junho looked like he had not slept in several days, which was normal. He looked up when they came in, waved at Ji-yeon, and went back to his screen. "Junho runs the drone network," Ji-yeon said. "He has for 8 years. "Is it ready?" Daewon asked. "It's been ready for 2, Junho said. Without looking up, they left him to his work. On the way back to the lift, Ji-yeon told Daewon about the 17 individuals, not species, individuals, who had been working as quiet informants inside Concordat systems for the last 10 years. Defectors, exiles, creatures from Concordat member worlds who had their own reasons to resent the coalition that governed them. She had found them one at a time over many years, through careful and patient work. They had fed her fleet positions and supply routes, council votes before they were cast, and deployment schedules for every major Concordat military formation in the region. She knew where every ship was. She had known for years. Daewon stepped into the lift. He pressed the button for the surface and watched the doors close. He was quiet for most of the ride. Then he said, "When did you start planning all of this?" Ji-yeon looked at the lift doors. "The day we joined the Concordat," she said. "I read the membership charter. There was a clause in it, Article 31, subsection 4. It said that any member species that was deemed a destabilizing influence could be subject to military oversight by a 2/3 council vote." She paused. No human diplomat flagged it. No one thought it would ever apply to us. She paused again. "I thought it would always apply to us." The lift opened. She walked out into the thin Martian light. "So I got ready," she said. Far away in a border colony called Hail Station, a young soldier named Tail watched the last civilian evacuation ship lift off from the landing pad. Dust blew across the empty platform. The colony was quiet now. Half the buildings were dark. Tail had been stationed here for 8 months, and in that time he had filed cargo reports and fixed a water recycler and played cards with the same 4 people every night. He looked at the ship until it disappeared into the sky. Then he walked to the volunteer board outside the garrison office and put his name down for Ji-yeon's newly announced frontline division. The board was almost full. He had to write his name small to make it fit. He didn't think about the Concordat's 6-week projection while he wrote it. He thought about the water recycler he had fixed. He thought about the cards. He thought about the empty buildings behind him. Then he capped his pen and went inside to get his assignment. On the 90th day, Vorith made a speech. It was broadcast across all Concordat frequencies and a large number of human ones as well. He stood at a podium in full ceremonial dress, layers of dark amber shell plate polished to a shine, and he spoke for 22 minutes. He talked about the responsibility of older civilizations to guide younger ones. He talked about the danger of unchecked expansion and the importance of order. He talked about humanity's potential and how that potential made their refusal to cooperate all the more tragic. He said the Concordat had not wanted this. He said humanity had chosen this. He said that the fleet now moving toward human space was not an act of war, but an act of correction, and that Earth's people, once they understood the reality of their situation, would be welcomed back into the Concordat as full members under the new framework. He called it, at the end, a moment of necessary pain for a better future. And then he sat down. Ji-yeon did not respond to the broadcast. She was not watching it. She was sitting in the operations room beneath the Martian surface, in front of a wall of screens, with Day One on one side and Junho's voice in her earpiece on the other. She had a cup of cold coffee on the desk that she had not touched in 2 hours. "Fleet positions confirmed?" she said. "Confirmed," said Daewon. "Interdiction network?" "Standing by," said Junho. "All nodes active. Waiting on your word." She picked up the cold coffee. She took 1 sip. She set it back down. "Now," she said. The interdiction field went live across 4 separate regions of space simultaneously. It didn't look like anything from the outside. There was no flash, no visible wave, nothing dramatic. Ships simply found all at once that their jump drives were returning errors. Navigation systems cycled and recycled and could not resolve a path. Pilots ran diagnostics. Engineers checked power feeds. Captains called their fleet coordinators. The lead Concordat formation, 460 ships assembled from 9 species, the largest military coalition ever organized in the region's history, discovered that it was stuck. They were not in danger yet. They were not under fire. They were simply unable to leave the space they were in. and for a military fleet that had been built around the assumption of rapid jump-and-strike tactics, and being unable to jump was the first piece of a very bad equation. For 43 seconds, all the Concordate's open channels filled with confused chatter. Then, Junho's drone network opened up. The launchers in the thresh belt fired in sequence, not all at once, but in a careful pattern, timed and angled with the kind of precision that only 8 years of preparation could produce. The projectiles were not missiles. They had no warheads. They were dense and fast and cold, and they came from a direction the Concordate fleet was not facing, at a range that nothing in the fleet's threat models had accounted for. The first 3 hit Concordate destroyers broadside, not full impacts. Jian had instructed Junho to aim for drive systems and sensor arrays, not crew sections. The goal was not to destroy. The goal was to show. All 3 destroyers went dark at the back end and began to drift. Their weapons were still active. Their crews were alive and unharmed, and they just couldn't go anywhere. The fleet went completely silent for 11 seconds after that. Then every emergency channel opened at once. On Heil Station's surface, Tyle's unit was crouched in the narrow maintenance corridors beneath the station's main deck. The station had been partially occupied by a Concordate ground force 3 days earlier. A fast insertion team sent to secure border positions as the 90-day window came to a close, and the Concordate troops had moved through the upper levels quickly and efficiently and had set up a command post in the station's communication hub. What they had not done was check the lower corridors. Tail's sergeant was a woman named Bora. She was short, quiet, and had been fighting in some form or another since she was 19 years old. She did not make long speeches before operations. She had given her unit exactly 4 words before they moved into position. Stay low. Stay close. When the order came through Tyle's earpiece, the interdiction field was live. The drones had fired. Now was the time. Bora simply stood up and started walking. Tyle followed her. The Concordate troops in the communication hub were still processing what was happening in orbit when the doors opened. There were 14 of them. They were larger than humans, most of them, broader through the chest, and built for the kind of intimidating physical presence that worked well in peacetime enforcement. They turned toward the door with weapons raised. They found 12 humans already inside the room, having come up through access panels in the floor. The Concordate commander looked at Bora. Bora looked at him. "We read your deployment orders 2 days ago," she said. "Put the weapons down." After a very short pause, he did. The station was secured in 18 minutes without a single shot fired. Tail sat down on a crate near the wall after it was done and looked at the Concordate soldiers sitting on the floor in a row. They looked confused. They looked the way all of them looked now, across every front where human units had been waiting, not beaten down, just genuinely unable to understand how the numbers in their own models had been so completely wrong. Up in orbit, the situation was the same. By the end of that day, the first day, no human territory had been taken. 4 Concordate fleet formations were locked inside interdiction fields, unable to jump, their supply lines cut off and their tactical networks jammed. The rapid 6-week conquest that the Concordate's projection report had outlined had not begun. Instead, it was the Concordate that was trapped, sitting in human space, looking out at drone platforms they hadn't known existed, and an enemy that had not lost a single ship. In the Grand Chamber, on now running an emergency session with half its seats empty, Vorith sat very still and watched the tactical feeds scroll across the main display. His aide stood beside him and waited for instructions. Vorith watched the numbers. He watched the positions. He watched 460 ships sitting motionless in space because a human had pressed a button and told them they could not leave. "Find out," he said very quietly, "what else they haven't told us." His aide left to do that. Vorith stayed in his seat for a long time, looking at the screens, thinking about a woman he had never met, who had read Article 31, Subsection 4, on a day before any of this had begun, and had simply started getting ready. The war did not end in a week. That was the thing nobody said in the early broadcasts. The ones that ran the footage of stranded Concordat fleets and Bora's unit standing in the communication hub of Hyol Station, with easy, tired expressions. The footage was real. The victories were real. But the Concordat had 12 member species and centuries of accumulated resources, and 9 of those 12 species had not pulled their fleets back. They had pushed more in. They came from different angles. They used different tactics. They tried jamming the interdiction nodes, and some of them partially worked. They sent in smaller, faster ships, built for close fighting in tight corridors, where drone launchers couldn't get a clean angle. One species sent a fleet of old generation ships, slow, enormous, shielded so heavily that the kinetic impactors just punched into the plating and stopped. The fight changed shape every week. Ji-Yan changed with it. She slept 4 hours a night. She ate at her desk. She ran 17 separate strategic operations at the same time, each one a different game against a different opponent. She won most of them. She did not win all of them. A relay station near the outer Thresh Belt was taken and held for 11 days before human forces could push back. A supply convoy was destroyed near the Sal corridor. 31 people died in that one. She read all 31 names. She always read the names. In the 6th week of the war, Daewon was hit. He was aboard a forward command station near the belt when a Concordat raiding team cut through the outer hull in 3 places at once. The team was destroyed. The station held. But Daewon took shrapnel through the left shoulder and the right side of his chest, and by the time the medical unit reached him, he had lost enough blood to make things serious for about 40 minutes. He lived. The damage was real, but not permanent. The doctors said he would be functional in 3 weeks if he rested, which made him argue with every single one of them. Ji-Yoon came to the medical bay on the 2nd day. She sat in the chair beside his bed and did not say anything for the first few minutes. The room was quiet. Daewon looked pale, and the machines beside him made soft, steady sounds, and outside the small porthole the stars were still and cold and completely indifferent to everything happening below them. "You don't have to be here," Daewon said. "I know," she said. He looked at the ceiling for a while. Then he said, "When you started all of this, the facility, the drones, the informants, did you ever think about what it would cost?" She was quiet long enough that it became its own kind of answer. "I thought about survival," she said finally. "I thought about what the Concordat would do to us in 20 years if we let them take our weapons and cap our population and tell us where we were allowed to go. I thought about what a slow, managed, politely explained end looks like for a species." She looked at the floor. "I didn't let myself think about cost. I thought if I started counting the cost, I would lose my nerve and build something smaller, something that wouldn't be enough." Daewon turned his head to look at her. "But someone still has to walk through the door," he said, "even when you built it right." "Yes," she said. "That's always been the part I'm sorry about." He didn't say anything to that. There wasn't a correct response to it, and both of them knew it. She stayed for another hour. And they talked about smaller things, a logistics problem in the outer belt, a supply route that needed rerouting, the quality of the coffee in the medical bay, which was genuinely terrible. When she left, she put her hand briefly on his good shoulder. He was back at his post in 18 days, not 3 weeks. She pretended not to notice. On the ground, Teal was in the middle of his 4th consecutive operation without a full rest period. His unit had been moved from Hull Station to a colony called Dozai, a mid-sized settlement on the edge of the Thresh Belt that the Concordat had been using as a forward resupply point. Taking it back was supposed to be a clean strike. Fast entry, secure the depot, done. It was not clean. The Concordat had left a rear guard, a small force, but dug in well, using the colony's storage structures as cover. The fighting moved through corridors and alleys between warehouses, close and slow and nothing like the orbital chess that the news feeds kept showing. Tail moved from doorway to doorway with his pulse rifle up and his mind very quiet. The way it went, when things were bad enough that thinking too much became dangerous. They got through it. The colony was secured. 7 people in his unit were wounded. 1 did not come back. That night, Tail sat outside the garrison with his back against the wall and wrote a message to his family. He wrote it slowly. He did not tell them what the day had been like. He told them what the colony looked like from the outside. The way the light hit the dust at this hour, warm and a little red. The kind of light that made everything look like it was worth saving. He told them he was fine. He told them he would be home when it was done. He sent it, and then sat for a while looking at the dust. Meanwhile, Ambassador Nari was doing what she had been doing since the war began. Talking. She was operating from a neutral station near the Vareth Drift, a region that 3 of the 12 Concordat species called home. Those 3, the Sioux, the Pelhari, and a small but old civilization called the Othan, had never been comfortable with the Concordat's military buildup. They had voted yes in the chamber because the pressure to do so had been enormous, and because they had believed the projection reports that said the war would be over in 6 weeks and would require very little of anyone. The war was not over in 6 weeks. Nari met with their representatives separately, one by one, over many long days. She did not threaten. She did not offer bribes. She showed them the numbers, the real numbers, not the projection reports. And she told them plainly what a prolonged Concordat military campaign would cost in ships and lives and resources. She told them it would not get faster. She told them humanity had no interest in their destruction, that Earth bore no anger toward species that had been pressured into a vote. "We are not at war with you," she told the Sioux delegation. "We were never at war with you. The question is whether you would like to continue being at war with us." 1 week later, the Sioux formally withdrew from the coalition. The Pelhari followed 4 days after that. The Othan took 2 more weeks, but they withdrew. Their 3 species out, 9 became 6. The Concordat's alliance had a crack running through it now, and cracks did not stay small. Back in the operations room, Daewon watched the withdrawal notices come in and placed them on the main display one by one. He looked at the shape of what remained. Then he looked at Jiyeon. "This is almost over," he said. "Getting there," she said. She was already reading the next brief. The end did not come with a single battle. That was not how it went. There was no final, enormous clash of fleets, no moment where every weapon fired at once and a winner stood alone in the wreckage. The Concordat's war against humanity ended the way a fire ends when you take away everything it needs to keep burning, slowly, in different places, one piece at a time. The 9th week brought the first formal surrender. A Concordat fleet commander in the outer belt, his ships sitting inside an interdiction field for 19 days with dwindling fuel and no resupply route, opened a channel to the nearest human command station and asked for terms. Daewon took the call. He offered the fleet safe transit out of the field on the condition that they left the region entirely. The commander agreed before Daewon finished the sentence. Then came another, then 2 more. Over the course of 3 weeks, 7 separate Concordat formations stood down, not because they had been destroyed. Most of them were still armed, still crewed, still capable of fighting. They stood down because the mathematics had become impossible to argue with. The supply lines were broken. The coalition was splitting. 3 species had already withdrawn, and a 4th, the Virali, had quietly stopped sending reinforcements without making any public announcement about it. The projection report that had promised a 6-week human collapse sat in every Concordat commander's file like an embarrassment no one wanted to name out loud. The formal ceasefire request came from Voreth directly. He sent it through diplomatic channels to Ambassador Nari, who read it, forwarded it to Ji-Yun, and waited. Ji-Yun replied with a single condition. The signing would happen aboard a human vessel, in human space, at a time of humanity's choosing. There was a long pause before Voreth accepted. The ship was a mid-sized command vessel called the Sail Dawn, parked in stable orbit above one of the Thresh Belt's outer stations. It was not the largest ship in the human fleet. It was not the most decorated. Ji-Yun had picked it because it had been one of the ships the Concordat's original projection report had listed as a likely early casualty. She did not mention this to anyone. She just liked knowing it. Voreth came aboard with a small delegation, 4 aides, and a legal officer. He moved slowly through the corridors of the ship, which were narrower than Concordat vessels, ceilings lower, lighting warmer. Human ships were built for humans, without the architectural flourishes that Concordat vessels use to suggest importance and permanence. The Sail Dawn felt functional and lived in, like something built by people who were more interested in what a ship could do than in what it looked like. He was shown into the negotiation room. Ji-Yun was already there. She was standing at the far side of the table. She was shorter than he had expected, which he knew was an irrational thing to notice, but he noticed it anyway. She wore the same plain, dark uniform she had worn, he later learned, for most of the war. She had no guards in the room. Daewon stood off to one side with a tablet, the way he always did. Voreth took his seat. His aides arranged themselves behind him. He looked across the table at her for a long moment. "You planned this from the beginning," he said. It came out more like a conclusion than an accusation. "I planned for the possibility," Ji-Yun said. "You made it a certainty." He was quiet for a moment. The projection report said 6 weeks. "Your projection report was built on accurate data," she said. "It was just missing some." He looked at the table. He had the air of a very old creature that had believed, for a very long time, and that it understood the shape of the world and had recently discovered that the world was a different shape than it had appeared. "We did not believe," he said slowly, "that any species would plan that far ahead for a war they claimed not to want." "We didn't want it," Ji-Yun said. "That's exactly why we planned for it. Things you don't want have a way of arriving anyway. The only variable is whether you're ready when they do." There was nothing he could say to that, so he didn't try. And the terms Ji-Yun placed on the table were read by Voreth's legal officer in silence. When the reading was finished, the officer looked up at his commander with an expression that was hard to read across species, but which clearly meant something like, This is not what I expected. 3 points. No reparations. No seizure of concordate ships or territories. No public statements of defeat required from any member species. First, all concordate expansion limitations on humanity were to be formally dissolved. Second, Earth's full military sovereignty was to be recognized in writing by all remaining concordate members. Third, the 3 species that had withdrawn from the coalition, the Sioux, the Pelhari, and the Othan, were to be granted full voting seats on the Concordate Council. They had been associate members for decades, allowed to attend sessions, but never to vote. That ended now. Vorith read the 3rd point twice. "You're rebuilding the council," Daewon said quietly from the side of the room. He was looking at Ji-yeon. She glanced at him. Someone has to. May as well be the ones they tried to break. Vorith set down the document. He looked at her for a long time without speaking. Whatever he was thinking, it did not translate well through his species' exterior, and he did not choose to share it. He picked up the signing instrument. He signed. The war was over. It did not feel, in that room, like winning felt in stories. There was no noise. Nobody cheered. Ji-yeon shook Vorith's hand. The gesture confused him slightly, but he accepted it. And then both delegations left the room by different doors, and the Sail Dawn continued its quiet orbit above the belt. Ji-yeon stood outside the room in the corridor for a moment. Daewon came out behind her. "Go home," he said. She almost argued. Then she didn't. Tail got back to Heil Station 2 days later, reassigned to reconstruction support while the formal ceasefire terms were processed. The station was being repaired, walls patched, systems reconnected, the landing pad cleaned of the dust and scorch marks the evacuation ships had left. People were coming back. Not all of them. Some of them had gone far enough that coming back would take time. But some of them were already there, opening up dark buildings, turning lights back on, arguing about where to put things. He was sitting on a supply crate outside the landing pad when a transport came in from a concordate-aligned world. Traders, carrying manufacturing components for the station's repair crews. The cargo doors opened and a young alien creature came down the ramp, moving carefully, clearly uncertain about the reception it would get on a human station so soon after everything. Tail watched it stop near the edge of the platform and look around. It was small, and it had too many limbs for a human to count quickly. It looked at Tail the way all of them had been looking at humans lately, like something they thought they understood, which had turned out to be something else entirely. Tail reached into his pack and pulled out a ration bar. He held it out. The alien looked at the bar. Then it looked at him. Then it took the bar with 2 of its smaller limbs and held it in a way that suggested it was not completely sure what it was, but was willing to find out. A soldier from Tile's unit walked past and stopped. "You think this is really over?" the soldier asked, watching the alien examine the ration bar. Tile looked at the transport. More crew were coming down the ramp. A few of them nodded at the humans nearby. One of the repair crew nodded back. "No," Tail said. "But that's fine." He picked up his bag and stood up. "We're good at not over."